The press gang of the Royal Navy. The press gang was a notorious institution within the Royal Navy during the 18th and 19th centuries, where men were forcibly recruited to serve in the Navy. This practice, known as pressing, was vital for maintaining a large and consistent fighting force, but was also a deeply controversial and often brutal process. Press gangs became infamous for their methods, as men were captured from cities, towns, and even rural areas, sometimes from their homes, workplaces, or public spaces, to serve aboard naval vessels. This narrative is proudly brought to you by Polly Speaks For You. At Polly Speaks For You, we are committed to empowering individuals, especially those with disabilities or learning challenges, through innovative text-to-speech and voice recognition technology. Polly Speaks For You is more than just software. It's a tool for self-expression, connecting people with the world in meaningful ways. By blending the richness of history with cutting-edge technology, Polly Speaks For You demonstrates that every voice, whether preserving the past or shaping the future, has the potential to inspire. While we strive to make the story engaging, our primary focus is on storytelling itself. The visuals are secondary. We're showcasing the remarkable capabilities of text-to-speech software that bring these stories to life. Origins and need for pressing. The press gang's roots can be traced back to the 17th century, but it gained significant traction during the 18th century, a time of constant naval conflict. The British Royal Navy needed large crews to maintain its global dominance, especially during the numerous wars with France and Spain. Volunteer numbers often fell short of the numbers required for these ships, leading to the implementation of the press gang system. Methods of recruitment. Press gangs were composed of officers and sailors who had the authority to press men into service. They would often use coercion, threats, and at times physical violence to recruit men. The usual method involved rounding up eligible men in a city or town and then taking them, often under duress, to a ship. Men were frequently taken in the middle of the night or during busy marketplaces, where they had little opportunity to resist. To avoid detection, press gangs often worked in groups and knew how to evade local law enforcement. They would target areas like taverns where men gathered and sometimes even raided homes. Once a man was pressed, he would be put aboard a ship and forced into service, sometimes for years. Anecdotal reminiscences and diary entries. The Diary of Samuel Brown, 1801. April 17th, 1801. I had just returned from a hard day's work at the docks when the press gang found me. I was at the Black Swan, nursing a pint, when they burst through the door. Before I knew it, I was surrounded, a sack thrown over my head, and dragged from my stool. The whole tavern watched but said nothing. They knew better. I could hear the clinking of their boots and the rustle of their coats as I was hauled through the streets. I tried to fight, but there were too many, and I was already too drunk to think straight. The sailor who had a grip on my arm only muttered, "Ain't no use, lad. You'll see soon enough." The last thing I remember before blacking out was the harsh sound of the ship's bell. That sound will haunt me forever. Brown's diary entry illustrates a common experience for those pressed into service. Many men were caught off guard while out socializing, taken when they least expected it, and rarely had a chance to resist once the press gang made its move. The memoir of John Williams, a press sailor. I was walking with my father through the market when they grabbed me. A sailor, bigger than most men I had seen, took me by the arm, and before I knew it, I was shoved into a cart. My father, helpless, begged the men to let me go, but they were merciless. I had heard of the press gang, but I had never thought it would happen to me. They didn't care if I was 16 or if I had work to finish. They simply needed bodies for the fleet. Aboard the ship, I thought about escape 100 times. The ship, the HMS Victory, was a beast of a vessel. Men fought for their survival, and I was no different. They had us swab the deck, haul ropes, and keep the sails in check. We were treated as less than human, but in the end, I found something resembling kinship with those around me. Some had been on the ship for years. Their faces were worn, their eyes hollow, and I could see the same dread in their eyes when they spoke of home. Home, for them, was a distant memory, erased by time and hardship. Williams's account speaks to the grueling life aboard a naval vessel, where the work was relentless, and the hope of returning home was often slim. For many pressed men, it was a life that stretched on without end, leaving them stranded in a foreign world. A letter from Lieutenant James McFarland, 1805. Dear Mother, it is with great sorrow that I must inform you I have pressed yet another man into service. The numbers are thin. The Army has been recruiting relentlessly, and we can hardly scrape together a crew for the ship. While it is my duty to fill the ranks, I do not take pleasure in the task. I had no choice but to press young Thomas from the local tavern. He was a sturdy lad, his arms thick from working with the farmers, and I knew he would serve us well. However, as I watched him struggle against his captors, I felt a weight in my chest I cannot easily shake. I pray you understand the nature of our work, for it is not one of honor, but one of necessity. The war against the French rages on, and we are stretched thin. Perhaps one day, I will return to you with better news. McFarland's letter reveals the internal conflict faced by some officers tasked with leading press gangs. While their duty was to fill the ranks of the Navy, many were aware of the moral and ethical implications of their actions. The emotional toll it took on these officers was often unspoken, yet apparent in the words of men like McFarland. Life aboard ship. Life aboard a Royal Navy ship during the age of sail was harsh. Pressed men were expected to work long hours, often in dangerous and uncomfortable conditions. They were given little choice in their roles, which could involve anything from swabbing the decks to working in the gunnery. For many, this was an experience fraught with hardship, where discipline was strict and punishment was severe. One particular account from an anonymous sailor describes the grueling work regimen. We woke before the sun, greeted by the sound of the boatswain's pipe. By the time the sun was high in the sky, our backs were sore from hauling ropes, our hands blistered from scrubbing the deck. The food was a thin broth with hard bread, often moldy. The officers never said much, but when they did, it was with a voice of command, not of care. Those of us who stepped out of line, even for a moment, felt the lash of the whip. Press-ganged men, who did not volunteer for the service, were often despised by their fellow sailors, but they were also crucial to maintaining the naval fleets. Over time, however, the Navy became more reliant on trained and experienced sailors, and the practice of pressing began to decline in the 19th century. Resistance and abolition. The press gang was widely criticized, especially as the 19th century progressed. Many saw it as an infringement on personal liberty, and protests grew over the brutal and unfair tactics employed. Sailors, as well as the general population, would sometimes rebel against press gangs, leading to riots in the streets. Over time, pressure from both the public and politicians led to the decline of the press gang system. By 1815, the British Navy began to rely more on voluntary enlistment and improved pay to attract sailors. The abolition of the press gang came in 1835, when it was finally made illegal, marking the end of one of the most infamous practices in naval history. Legacy. Though the press gang system has long been a part of history, its legacy remains as a dark chapter in the story of the British Navy. While it was effective in building a powerful fleet, it was also a system that relied on fear, force, and the exploitation of vulnerable people. It serves as a reminder of the lengths to which nations would go to maintain military dominance during a time of great naval rivalry. Today, the press gang is remembered primarily in stories and tales, often romanticized in popular culture, but it remains a significant reminder of the hardships faced by many sailors during the age of sail. Through the memoirs, letters, and diary entries of those who lived it, we can better understand the personal cost of this brutal practice and the lives that were forever changed by it. If you're enjoying this story, please remember to hit like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue creating content that educates and empowers. To learn more about South Africa's leading accessibility software and to support our dyslexic-friendly initiative, visit www.polispeaks4u.co.za. Drop a comment if you want more information. Thank you for reading.